Welcome to this 3-week intensive on lip trilling. For this first lesson, I want to take a look at some of the fundamentals, some of the foundations that we're going to build on top of for the later lessons. A lip trill is just like a regular trill, except we're going to play it without changing or moving the valves. We're doing so using only the harmonic series, the partials of the instrument, and it essentially is a rapid flexibility exercise. Now, lip trill is often used interchangeably with the term shake. I want to start off by clarifying these two are different things. A lip trill is what you use in classical music from the 18th century to now, as well as some of the famous cornet solos like Del Steger's arrangement of Carnival of Venice, as well as Rustique's by Bozza, the Haydn trumpet concerto. This is achieved primarily through tongue movement, which we're going to explore in depth in this course. A lip trill is typically a whole step, just like a fingered trill, and it's very regular in rhythm and even in tone. These are really important characteristics because they're a bit different from how a shake is normally interpreted. A shake is more common in commercial, jazz, Afro-Cuban music than it is in classical music. Essentially, it's exaggerated hand vibrato. It's a bit wilder and less controlled, less regular than a lip trill, even though a shake is a type of lip trill. You can think of Wayne Bergeron playing the Incredibles lick, where he's shaking a very wide interval. And this is a sort of lip trill. It's a very specific type of lip trill, where you are trilling not a whole step, you're trilling a wide interval. I think in his case, a high D up to maybe a G, so a fourth or even a fifth, in that well-known Wayne Bergeron lick that he plays. One can think of Louis Armstrong's playing, where his vibrato was sometimes so wide that he was moving between partials. He was no longer just bending the note up and down. And this expressive effect is the sort of seed of what we in contemporary music call a shake. Technically, a shake is a combination of lip, jaw, embouchure movement, and shaking the instrument slightly. At its core, as I mentioned, a shake is a type of lip trill. However, in this course, we're taking a very broad perspective on lip trills, so we're not going to look at the specific case of a shake, where you're trying to create a very wild, exaggerated effect. We're going to look at what is actually a bit more difficult to do, and that is to play a lip trill using mostly the tongue in a classical setting, in a setting where you have to be very precise and accurate. In this course, we are not going to be shaking the instrument, and it's especially important that we're not slamming the instrument into our flesh. Again, playing a shake does require some shaking of the instrument, but we are not necessarily looking at that specific case. Instead, we're going to look at how to build the necessary flexibility skills to perform a fast, smooth lip trill. Most people get really tense when they think of a lip trill, because the truth is, if you don't have great flexibility and you start just trying to lip trill, it's probably never going to happen. You're using the wrong tool. You're using the wrong lever. Take the example of walking and running. Walking is not the same as running. One might think that running is just a faster version of walking. After all, it's getting you from point A to point B using just your body. But if you look at the muscles that you're engaging, the movements that you're making when you're walking versus when you're running, they're actually extremely different. And for this reason, slow flexibility is very different from fast flexibility, or what you need to play a lip trill. So we will talk about many tools and mechanisms and processes in this course, and it will get a little bit heady or technical. Ultimately, it's really important to balance the information in this course with a healthy mindset of curiosity and exploration. We probably know too much when it comes to playing the trumpet. We probably know too much about what our body should be doing, rather than simply remaining aware of what our body actually is doing. This typically leads to much more creativity in how we solve a problem. I stand firm when I say that once you identify the primary driver of a lip trill, which is the movement of the tongue, which we're going to get into in just a minute, it will change your playing. It will change your endurance, your tone, your flexibility, nothing short of your life on the trumpet. Everything will get easier, more efficient, cleaner, more accurate and concise, and will essentially never look back and it'll be hard to imagine a time when we weren't using this driver. So what is this first mechanism, the tongue movement that I'm talking about? This is the first of the two mechanisms that we're going to look at in this course, and I want to start by talking about the tongue. So I would go so far as to say that skillful control over the tongue is the most important fine motor skill that you can develop to play the trumpet. So, of course, the air is the gasoline that powers our sound, right? Without the air, which is a very gross motor movement, it's very large muscles involved. Without our air, there is no sound. But without proper use of the tongue, our sound is 10 times more labor intensive. So what we're looking at first is, I'm going to show it on the screen here, is we're going to look at 4 parts of the tongue, and we're going to talk about why each of them are really important and which part we need to focus on for this course. So here we're going to look at 4 parts of the tongue, and we're going to do so using the help of this incredible 3D model that comes from sketchfab.com. I have the link to this below if you want to check it out and explore this 3D model on your own. The purpose of this is to look at this cross-section of the inside of the mouth. So we're only seeing half of the tongue being a large collection of muscles. We often tend to think of it as a flat surface. Of course, you can see its shape here, but of course, this is only half of it. So the complete half forms, a relatively large object inside our mouths. And as a result, it plays a huge role in shaping the sound as it is created by our embouchure and our air and enters and subsequently leaves the trumpet. So the first part of the tongue I want to look at, this is not a medical analysis. I'm not a doctor. I'm not really super deep into anatomy, so I won't be using official words. I'll be using words and terms that are relevant for us as trumpet players. So the tip of the tongue, which is more of a surface, it's not quite an apex, but it is a rounded surface. This is the part that articulates a T syllable right up here at where the top teeth meet the roof of the mouth. This is going to be, the tip of the tongue is going to be, essential to really train to move very efficiently when we're working on articulation, which is not the topic of this particular course. The second part of the tongue is the part we use for K articulation. So if we have ta, 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 then ka, ka, ka is the second part of the tongue. And the K is actually not in the very back of the tongue, as we tend to think. It's about here. It's about maybe a quarter of the way through the tongue. And this way, we can go taka 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 ta, and it's really efficient. Ha ta 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 ta. It's kind of hard for me to show you that, but you get the idea. So now there is the third part of the tongue, and that lies about here, about halfway through the tongue in this image, and it lines up roughly with the rear set of teeth, these molars back here. And we can find this part of the tongue by saying A and lightly biting down. It's important to do this light. You don't want to harm your tongue, cause damage. So just basically position your tongue as if you're saying A and lightly bite down. A. There's the spot. So essentially what we're doing here, this third part, when it's raised, it comes up to meet these teeth. It comes slightly forward as well, comes up, and the whole tongue moves slightly forward. This is our nozzle. This is the part of the tongue that, similar to putting your finger over a hose, partially over a hose, it basically creates less space inside the mouth. When we raise the tongue, we're closing off this gap here between the tongue and the roof of the mouth. We're closing off that gap more, which means that air that's coming from our lungs down there up through here, the air is forced to move through a more narrow area and therefore speeds up. Now, you've probably heard this idea in countless videos, masterclasses, if you've been studying the trumpet for a long time. So this nozzle that is roughly this part of the tongue, we can find it whenever we want by the exercise I showed you a minute ago, which is saying A. A. And it's even more pronounced if you go from saying ah, which is a relatively neutral tongue, to saying A. Ah, A, ah, A, ah, A. That is roughly the motion that will allow us to lip trill. Now, it's a bit more nuanced, which I want to get into next. But this sort of preliminary understanding of the different parts of the tongue is going to go really far. So there is, didn't mention this, but there is a fourth part of the tongue, and it's basically everything here. This part of the tongue is really important when it comes to producing a warm, open, round sound. So if this part of the tongue is tense, or if it's moved out here in this direction or up in this direction, it can kind of block the sound. And you can say ol, ol. And you can kind of feel how you can control that part of your tongue back there. So if we want to play, especially in the low register, with a really wide, warm sound, we want to learn to keep this part of the tongue close to the jaw, essentially, close to the mouth, to allow a very wide resonant space back here. But this is not a course where we're necessarily going to look at that in too much detail. I want to really focus our attention on this third part of the tongue, this nozzle. So next, I want to look at syllables. You've probably been told, as I have, to say E to play high notes, ah to play low notes, and maybe I for something in between. I think of the Louis Maggio method, which contains that. It contains specific ranges with specific syllables. And this idea of syllables was always really interesting to me. It felt like maybe it was a bit more nuanced than I was being told, that maybe there's a finer variation and gradation of syllables. And that would be correct. To sort of kick off our discussion on syllables, I want to utilize a resource that isn't often utilized in the trumpet playing world, and that is IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. If you're a singer, you're very familiar with IPA. I am not a singer, so I've had to learn a lot of this as I've gone. So here we have the IPA, or the International Phonetic Alphabet, and this is an alphabetic system of phonetic notation, which means it's notation that notates sounds. And it's based on a variety of different alphabets. You see, it doesn't just use the alphabet that we use here in America. It uses a variety of Latin letters as well. And its purpose is to standardize the notational representation of language so that all the different sounds that humans can make, so that we have a standard written language to talk about these sounds, IPA steps in here. Now, you've certainly heard of IPA if you're a singer. Singers utilize it all the time. Trumpet players probably haven't had to deal with it. Working here at Tone-Based Trumpet, I was lucky enough to start Tone-Based Trumpet at the same time as Tone-Based Voice was started. So Tone-Based Voice, which is new to me, I'm not a singer, Tone-Based Voice was putting together content around IPA, the International Phonetic Association, the Phonetic Alphabet, excuse me. And this was fascinating to me because I thought, oh, syllables. Trumpet players have to think about syllables too. We have to think about the position of our tongue in relation to the rest of our mouth all the time. And yet we don't have a systematic way of talking about it. I wanted to change that with this particular course. I wanted to explore how we can use this vowel chart, this IPA vowel chart, to really explore syllables on the trumpet. So at this link here on Wikipedia, we have a chart of all the vowels in IPA, way more than 5. And we see a couple of terms here by which the vowels are organized. So we have on top front, central, and back. And this refers to where the tongue is being placed, whether the sound is happening at the front of the mouth, the front of the tongue is a bit up, the center, or the back of the tongue is a little bit up. And the axis over here on the left side, close, mid, open, is referring to how closed the oral cavity is. So a close sound or a close sound is where the tongue is as close as possible to the roof of the mouth without creating an obstruction. So if the tongue does hit the roof of the mouth, suddenly you have a consonant sound, which is no longer a vowel. And if we play the trumpet with a consonant, we're blocking off all the air and there's no sound that's going to come out. So it's important that we play with vowels, which are open sounds that allow. By contrast here, an open vowel is where the tongue is as far as possible from the roof of the mouth. The mouth or jaw is usually open, but it doesn't need to be. Think of a ventriloquist, someone who is able to create all the same variety of sounds that you and I can, but they do so with their lips closed, with their mouth closed. kind of like this. I can't really do it. I'm not going to try to do it. But that, goes to show how the inside of the mouth is doing the work. It's not the lips, it's the inside of the mouth that is creating these sounds. So, how does this apply to trumpet playing? Well, I think many of us were told at a relatively young age that we need to say E to play high. So, this E sound is actually all the way here at the top left corner. It's a close front sound.
E, E.
This E sound is where the tongue is as close as possible to the roof of the mouth without creating an obstruction. If you go too far, you just get a K or some white noise. And the sound is coming from the front of the tongue. So E, 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 E. If the sound was coming from the back of the tongue, we'd have E, E, And for playing the trumpet, for having the tongue up high, this E sound is on one end of a continuum. So let's continue exploring this continuum. If we go all the way to the other corner down here, we get this sound.
Ah.
Aw. This is an open sound where the tongue is very low, and the sound is coming from the back of the tongue. Aw, 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 aw. Now, I encourage you to explore this and look at all the different syllables that are here, how they sound, how they feel to play. What you'll start to find is that there's a continuum of sounds, from open to close, front to back, and we can use this to help inform our trumpet playing. So for a second, consider whistling. Now, I can't whistle. I've never put in the time to learn. So if you also can't whistle, then you can just blow air. And think about the variety of timbres you can create. If I'm just moving my tongue through different syllables. What I'm doing is manipulating the tongue in the same way that I would if I were playing trumpet and if I were saying these syllables. Now, if you're whistling, you'll notice that to whistle a high note, the back of the tongue goes up. To whistle a low note, the back of the tongue goes down. Or I should say this third part of the tongue, this middle part of the tongue. Of course, on the trumpet, there is some lip and facial movement that takes place. We're going to look at that separately. We're not going to look at that quite yet. Basically, to activate this lip slur or flexibility lever, we're thinking about moving from a back open syllable, something like
Ah.
aw, to a close front syllable, something like
E.
E. The first thing that we'll notice here is that to play a lip trill, we actually don't want to move all the way from E to all. E-all, E-all, E-all. That's a really wide range to move. And if we're moving that wide of a range for a simple lip trill, then we're going to very quickly find we just run out of space to go even higher or even lower. Really, this all E is suitable for the extreme ends of range, from a double pedal to double high C. Maybe we'll cover that type of ground. But for a simple lip trill, we're actually thinking of much more nuanced movements of the tongue. So the two sounds that I recommend we start with are going to be
Ah.
this central near open sound,
Ah.
and
Eh.
which is this front open mid sound, You see my tongue, is still lifting. That middle part of the tongue is still lifting, but it's a much more nuanced, it's a smaller shift than all E, like a donkey, all E, all, right? That is too much movement to perform a lip trill efficiently. And many pedagogues, many resources will say, just go ah, ee, ah, ee, ah, ee, ah. When you look at these syllables here, via IPA, you can see much more scientifically that these syllables are really different. They're really far apart. And we actually need something much more nuanced. So I recommend starting here. Now, the way that I would write these two sounds on paper might be UH, if you're speaking American English, with a little bit of an tinge to it. And this one, I would probably give an EH if I were writing it down. So I want us to try this using the notes A sharp to C sharp, basically a lip trill using 1, 2, and 3, only I want to slow it way down, and I want to just play a simple lip slur between these two notes, but I want to use this concept of these syllables going from to As we move up on this chart, up and to the left, the notes go higher on the trumpet. And as we move down into the right, the notes go lower. So I want to try this A sharp to C sharp lip trill. I'm only going to do it using the syllable change in the tongue from to eh. I'm going to kind of ignore what's happening here for now. You might see something happen, but don't pay attention to it just yet. We're going to save that for the second video. Don't try to speed it up just yet. Just focus on this really slow movement and try to see if you can get the note to change without exaggerating the syllable change. You want it to be a very small change in tongue position. Eh. The smaller, the better. Be sure to keep the air moving. Don't let the air stop. And also try to make sure that you're, using the best sound that you can make, that you're, still thinking about sound quality. Let's give it a try. Okay, when I do that slow, I'm aware of the movement my tongue is making. If you're getting tripped up, just think of it like a toddler learning to walk. It takes time to learn the coordination of where to put your feet, how much energy to put onto which muscles to keep your balance, and sometimes you trip and fall. It still happens to me sometimes too, walking and playing the trumpet. So we want to give ourselves the grace to spend a lot of time just working on these very, very simple exercises before we jump to a lip trill. You can think about rolling your R's. So I learned how to roll my R's only a couple years ago. And my Spanish accent is terrible, but I have, just by watching people and practicing at home, I managed to figure out the right balance of airspeed, which muscles to tighten, which muscles to relax. And then when I go to roll my R's, I just trust gravity, the elasticity of my tongue, and my air to do the work. I'm not thinking about every single movement of the tongue. I was trying there. I was getting a little caught up because I was thinking a little bit too much about what my tongue was doing. When we lip trill, when we make this go faster, it's quite similar. We're not necessarily thinking about every single oscillation of the tongue. We use our air and we relax our tongue in such a way that it kind of just starts happening automatically. And we'll see a little bit later how that works. But for now, I just want to address the fact that slow flexibility and fast flexibility are altogether different. They're as different as walking is to running. They're definitely not the same exact thing on the trumpet. It's a very similar mechanism, but it feels quite different to do, and we need to practice them quite differently. So let's play this slur here a little bit faster. This probably won't work right away. If it does, congrats, you're done. You figured it out on week 1. We probably need to think about the second driver, and that is the embouchure. What is happening here in the chops when we're lip trilling? And this is going to be the topic of the second video for this week.